When people imagine alarms going off inside the Pentagon, they usually picture familiar names. China testing a new missile, Russia flying too close to NATO airspace, or maybe a classified program that leaked before it was ready. Those are the kinds of threats America's defense system is built to expect. But this time, none of those were responsible. The moment that raised eyebrows in Washington didn't come from Beijing or Moscow. It didn't come from a secret weapons lab or a trillion-dollar black budget. It came from one foreign aircraft, a jet most Americans have barely heard of. A Swedish fighter, not a stealth bomber, not a hypersonic prototype. Just a single Gripen E, built by a country of about 10 million people, quietly doing its job during a NATO exercise. That's what made it unsettling. Sweden isn't supposed to scare anyone at the Pentagon. It's not a superpower. It doesn't spend hundreds of billions on defense. Its air force is small, its industry modest compared to the giants of the world. And yet, during a routine NATO drill, something about this jet didn't sit right with the analysts watching the data come in. Because the numbers didn't match expectations. On paper, the United States fields the most advanced fighter ever built, the F-35. It's packed with sensors, stealth coatings, and more computing power than early space missions. Against that, a lightweight Nordic fighter shouldn't even be part of the conversation. And yet, it was. Not because it won dogfights, not because it broke radar laws, but because something fundamental wasn't adding up. The Gripen E was showing up again and again in the data, long after other aircraft had gone quiet. This wasn't a headline moment, no press release, no public statement, just a growing sense among the people watching closely that something unexpected was happening, and they didn't yet understand why. That question, how did this happen, is what takes us to one of the harshest environments on Earth, where the assumptions behind modern air power were about to be tested in the worst possible conditions. The exercise that triggered all of this didn't take place over warm oceans or pristine runways. It happened above the Arctic Circle, in a region designed to punish mistakes. This was a NATO war game meant to simulate real combat under worst-case conditions. Temperatures well below freezing, high winds, ice forming on aircraft surfaces, electronics struggling in extreme cold, and on top of that, heavy electronic warfare, jamming, interference, and disrupted communications. This wasn't a scripted demo. It was a stress test, the kind meant to expose weaknesses, not hide them. And very quickly, the results started to diverge from expectations. American F-35s and European Eurofighters flew their missions, but then they spent long stretches on the ground. Maintenance checks took longer. De-icing slowed operations. Systems had to be inspected, reset, or recalibrated. Each delay made sense on its own. Together, they added up. Meanwhile, the Swedish Gripen E kept launching, again, and again, and again. When analysts reviewed the flight data, one number stood out so sharply it couldn't be ignored. The Gripen E flew roughly 3 times as many sorties as the F-35 during the exercise. That's not a small difference. That's not a rounding error. In military terms, that's a different class of performance. Some American personnel at the Arctic base described it in plain language. The Swedish jets just wouldn't stop flying. This mattered because Arctic conditions aren't a niche scenario anymore. The Arctic is becoming a strategic frontier. Shorter missile routes, contested airspace, rising military presence. Any future conflict involving Northern Europe, Russia, or even the Pacific could look a lot like this environment. And in combat, sortie rate is power. Every time a jet takes off, it can defend airspace, strike a target, gather intelligence, or support troops on the ground. A fighter that flies once is useful. A fighter that flies 3 times as often controls the tempo of the battle. What made this moment tense wasn't just that the Gripen performed well, it was that it performed consistently, while more complex aircraft struggled to keep pace. The observers weren't emotional, they were professional, but the reaction was unmistakable. Quiet surprise, followed by concern, because the Arctic didn't care how advanced an aircraft was on paper. It only rewarded what could operate reliably, repeatedly, and under pressure. And that realization led to a much bigger question, one that cuts to the heart of modern air combat. What if flying more often matters more than flying perfectly? When most people think about air combat, they imagine dramatic dogfights, stealth jets sneaking past radar, or missiles streaking through the sky. That image comes from movies and highlight reels. But real air power works differently. In modern warfare, tempo is power. Tempo means how fast you can act, how often you can act, and how long you can keep acting without burning out your forces. It's not about having the single best aircraft in the sky. It's about how many times you can put aircraft into the sky when it actually matters. This is where the Gripen E changed the conversation. During the Arctic exercise, the Gripen wasn't flying more because it was pushed harder. It was flying more because it was designed to turn around fast. After landing, a Gripen E could be rearmed, refueled, checked, and back in the air in under 10 minutes. No hangars, no massive ground crews, no specialized equipment trains stretching across the base. Just a small team, simple tools, and a jet built to keep moving. To understand why this matters, think of two firefighters. One has the most advanced fire truck ever built, but it takes an hour to refill and reset. The other has a simpler truck that can be back on the road in minutes. When the fire keeps spreading, the second firefighter does more to stop it, even if his truck is less impressive. That's tempo. The Gripen E was also operating from places most jets aren't meant to use. Icy runways, rough airstrips, even highways. These weren't emergency measures. This was normal operating doctrine for Sweden. The aircraft was built with this reality in mind from the very beginning. Meanwhile, more complex aircraft needed clean conditions, longer checks, and tightly controlled support systems. Again, none of that is a flaw. It's the cost of extreme sophistication. But in the Arctic, sophistication came with friction, and friction kills tempo. This is the uncomfortable truth the exercise revealed. Air superiority isn't sustained by perfection, it's sustained by endurance. The jet that can fly again and again shapes the battle, regardless of how advanced its sensors are. By the end of the drill, it was clear the Gripen wasn't just participating, it was setting the rhythm. And once you control the rhythm of a fight, everything else starts bending in your favor. That realization forced analysts to look deeper, beyond performance numbers, and ask why these two aircraft behaved so differently. The answer wasn't technical, it was philosophical. At this point, it became clear that the Gripen E wasn't outperforming the F-35 by chance. The difference came from how each aircraft was designed to fight a war. The American approach to air power is built around dominance, large, secure air bases, global logistics networks, enormous technical sophistication. The idea is simple. If you control the infrastructure, protect your bases, and field the most advanced systems, you control the battlefield. For decades, that strategy worked. The F-35 fits perfectly into this model. It's a flying sensor fusion platform designed to operate as part of a vast coordinated system. But that system assumes something important, that the bases, supply lines, and support crews will still be there when the war starts. Sweden never made that assumption. From Sweden's perspective, any future conflict would begin with attacks on air bases. Runways would be cratered, communications disrupted, supply lines cut. Survival would depend on not being easy to find or easy to stop. So the Gripen E was designed around dispersion. Instead of relying on a few massive bases, it can operate from roads, forest clearings, and short, damaged runways. Instead of huge maintenance teams, it needs a handful of technicians. Instead of weeks-long overhauls, its engine can be swapped in under an hour. Think of it like two boxers. One is trained for a championship match in a perfect arena. The other is trained to fight anywhere, anytime, even when the rules break down. Neither is better in every sense, but only one is built for chaos. The Gripen software follows the same logic. Its modular digital architecture allows Sweden to update systems and integrate weapons without waiting for foreign approval or navigating layers of external bureaucracy. That means faster adaptation when conditions change. Every design choice points back to one goal: stay alive, stay flying, and stay unpredictable. This is the aha moment of the entire story. The Gripen didn't win because it was stronger. It won because it was designed for a different kind of war. One where infrastructure is fragile, conditions are hostile, and survival matters more than elegance. And once that philosophical gap became clear, another reality hit even harder, one that no military can ignore for long. Because philosophy doesn't just shape performance, it shapes cost. Up to this point, the story might sound like a debate between design choices or military doctrines. But, the moment costs enter the picture, it becomes something far more concrete. Because war is not just fought with weapons, it's fought with resources. During the Arctic exercise analysis, two numbers stood side by side, and they were impossible to ignore. A single hour of flight for the Gripen E costs roughly $4,700. A single hour of flight for the F-35 costs around $44,000. That's not a small difference. That's nearly 10 to 1. To understand what this means, imagine two runners. One is a heavyweight sprinter, powerful, explosive, but exhausted quickly. The other is a marathon runner, lighter, slower in short bursts, but capable of going all day. In a short race, the sprinter looks unbeatable. In a long one, the marathon runner wins by simply not stopping. That's exactly how these costs translate in combat. Lower flight hour costs mean pilots can train more often. More training means sharper skills, faster reactions, and better decision-making under pressure. It also means aircraft can stay active during long conflicts without draining national budgets. For the F-35, every hour in the air is a major financial decision. Over weeks or months of sustained operations, that cost compounds quickly. Readiness becomes harder to maintain. Training hours shrink. Tempo slows. For the Gripen E, high sortie rates are economically sustainable. This isn't about being cheap. It's about endurance. In modern warfare, conflicts rarely end quickly. They drag on, consuming fuel, spare parts, and money. An aircraft that a nation can afford to fly 10 times as often isn't just more economical, it's more dangerous to the enemy. That's why this issue caught the attention of more than just military planners. Taxpayers, defense ministries, and allied governments all understand the same basic truth. If you can't afford to keep flying, you can't keep fighting. And yet the Gripen's advantage didn't stop at cost or maintenance. There was another battlefield where it quietly outperformed expectations, one you can't see from the ground: the digital battlefield. When people picture air combat, they imagine jets, missiles, and explosions. But in modern warfare, some of the most important fighting happens invisibly, in the electromagnetic spectrum. This is the digital battlefield: radar signals, data links, encrypted communications, electronic jamming. Whoever controls this space controls what pilots can see, what they can share, and how fast they can react. The United States has invested billions to dominate this domain, so when analysts reviewed the Arctic exercise, they expected American aircraft to hold the advantage here. That's not what happened. The Gripen E didn't just fly more, it functioned as a resilient digital node. Even under heavy electronic interference, it continued sharing real-time data with other aircraft, ground radars, and naval units. When jamming degraded parts of the network, the system didn't collapse. It adapted. Think of it like the internet. A centralized server goes down, and everything stops. A decentralized network loses a few connections and keeps working. Gripen was built like the second one. Swedish pilots were able to identify and track targets early, sometimes before American aircraft had full situational awareness. This wasn't because the Gripen had better stealth or more raw computing power. It was because its systems were designed to operate even when information was incomplete. Partial degradation didn't mean mission failure. The Gripen's modular software and robust encryption made it harder to suppress than expected. Instead of relying on constant high-bandwidth connections, it could continue operating effectively with limited data, an enormous advantage in a contested environment. This reinforced a critical lesson from the exercise. Future air combat won't reward systems that only work under perfect conditions. It will reward systems that keep functioning when conditions are broken. By this point, the implications were impossible to ignore. The Gripen wasn't just cheaper or tougher. It represented a different way of fighting, one that reduced dependence on centralized control. And that realization led to the most uncomfortable question of all. Because if a country can fight effectively without relying on American systems, what does that mean for American influence? By now, the Pentagon's concern wasn't really about which jet flew better in the Arctic. It was about something far more sensitive: control. For decades, the United States hasn't just sold fighter jets, it has exported influence. When a country buys an American fighter like the F-35, it doesn't just get an aircraft, it enters a long-term relationship with Washington. F-35 operators depend on the U.S. for software updates, mission data files, diagnostics, and major maintenance. Upgrades require approval. Systems are integrated into American-controlled networks. This isn't an accident, it's a feature. It keeps allies aligned, interoperable, and politically connected to the United States. The Gripen E breaks that model. Countries that operate Gripen retain full sovereign control over their aircraft. They control the software. They decide when and how to upgrade. They integrate weapons without asking for permission. There are no remote locks, no foreign maintenance monopolies, no outside veto power over how the jet is used. From Washington's perspective, that's disruptive. It means a nation can field a modern, competitive air force without tying its defense posture to U.S. political cycles or strategic priorities. It means allies could choose autonomy over dependence. And if enough countries make that choice, America's traditional leverage, built through aircraft exports, begins to weaken. This is why the Arctic exercise echoed far beyond Sweden. Countries like Brazil, Hungary, Thailand, and South Africa were already operating Gripens. After the Arctic results, interest grew. Not because these nations wanted to challenge the U.S., but because they wanted options, and options change power dynamics. The Pentagon understood this immediately. The concern wasn't losing a contract, it was losing a system of influence that had shaped alliances for generations. Fighter aircraft aren't just tools of war, they're tools of strategy. By proving that independence, resilience, and affordability could coexist in a modern fighter, the Gripen E introduced a new idea into global defense thinking. And that idea forced one final, unavoidable question. If this is the kind of war the world is moving toward, and this is the kind of aircraft built for it, what comes after the F-35? By the time the Arctic exercise reports finished circulating, one thing was clear. This was never about proving the F-35 had failed. It hasn't. The F-35 remains one of the most advanced aircraft ever built. Its stealth, sensor fusion, and strike capabilities are unmatched in many scenarios. In the opening days of a conflict, when infrastructure is intact and networks are functioning, it is a powerful weapon. But the world it was designed for is changing. Future wars are unlikely to be clean, short, or centralized. They will be messy, fast-moving, and spread across wide areas. Air bases will be targeted early. Supply chains will be disrupted. Communications will be jammed. And victory will depend less on perfection and more on who can keep fighting when conditions fall apart. The Arctic exercise made that reality impossible to ignore. The Gripen E didn't outperform the F-35 because it was superior in every technical category. It outperformed it because it was built for a different phase of war, the long grinding phase where endurance, adaptability, and cost control matter more than elegance. That's why a new conversation has started inside American defense circles, not about replacing the F-35, but about complementing it, about whether the United States needs a lightweight, lower-cost, high-availability fighter designed for dispersed operations and sustained tempo. In other words, something with a Gripen-style philosophy. The lesson from the Arctic isn't that the biggest or most expensive aircraft wins. It's that the aircraft that can take off again and again from imperfect places, under imperfect conditions, ultimately shapes the battlefield. And that brings the story back to you. What do you think the United States should take away from Gripen's performance? Does America need a new, affordable fighter to fight alongside the F-35? Or is this a warning that strategy needs to evolve just as much as technology? If you found this breakdown valuable and want more clear, fact-driven analysis on global air power and future warfare, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. And let me know your thoughts in the comments, because the future of air combat isn't just being decided in war games, it's being debated right now. Thanks for watching.